The sound of a child's heart breaking is silent. You don't hear it crack. You just see the light go out in their eyes. I saw that light go out in my 5-year-old son. Leo, on a sunny Saturday afternoon in July, we were at the Kensington estate, my in-law's massive property that looked more like a museum than a home. It was my father-in-law Richard's 65th birthday party. The lawn was perfectly manicured. The guests were holding crystal champagne flutes, and the air smelled of expensive perfume and judgment. Leo was holding a drawing. He had spent 3 hours on it the night before. It was a picture of him holding hands with a tall woman in a purple dress. He spotted her across the lawn. Evelyn, my mother-in-law, was wearing that exact purple dress, holding court with her friends, looking like the Queen of England. Grandma! Leo shouted, his little legs pumped as he ran across the grass, the drawing flapping in his hand. Grandma, look! I started to walk after him, smiling. I wanted so badly for this to be a good day. I wanted, just for once, for her to hug him. Leo reached her. He tugged on the expensive fabric of her skirt. Grandma, I drew you. Evelyn froze. She didn't turn around slowly. She whipped around. She looked down at my son, her grandson, not with love, not even with annoyance. She looked at him with disgust, like he was a muddy dog that had just jumped on her. She reached down, peeled his small fingers off her dress, and took a step back. The garden went quiet. Leo, she said, her voice ice cold, loud enough for everyone to hear. How many times do I have to tell you? Leo looked up, his smile faltering. But it's a picture. I am not your grandma, she hissed. Do not call me that. You are not a Kensington. You are a mistake. She swatted the paper from his hand. It fluttered to the grass, landing face down in the dirt. Go find your mother, she said, wiping her hand on a napkin as if his touch had contaminated her. Before you ruin the grass. Leo stood there. He didn't cry immediately. He just looked confused. He looked at the paper, then at her, then back at the pottery. Felt a heat rise in my chest that I had never felt before. It wasn't just anger. It was a primal, burning rage. I walked over, scooped Leo up into my arms, and picked up his drawing. My husband, Mark, was rushing over, his face pale. Mom, what the hell? Control your wife's offspring, Mark, Evelyn said, turning back to her friends and taking a sip of champagne. He's embarrassing the family, though. I suppose that's what happens when you dilute the bloodline. I held Leo tight. He buried his face in my neck and started to sob. I looked at the back of her head. I looked at her perfect hair, her diamonds, her arrogance in that moment. I didn't scream. I didn't make a scene. I didn't throw a drink in her face. I just rubbed Leo's back and whispered, It's okay, baby, mommy's got you. But in my head, I made a promise. You want to talk about bloodlines, Evelyn? I thought you want to talk about purity? Fine, I was going to give her exactly what she wanted, and it was going to destroy her to understand why she hated us. You have to understand who Evelyn Kensington is. She comes from old money, the kind of money that doesn't shout. It whispers. Her family founded banks. They built libraries. They cared about two things: image and lineage. I came from nothing. My dad was a mechanic. My mom waited tables. I worked my way through college on scholarships and 2 jobs when I met Mark. I didn't know he was rich. He drove a beat-up Honda and wore thrift store flannels. He was kind, funny, and humble. By the time I found out he was that kind of rich, I was already in love. When Mark introduced me to his parents, his father, Richard, was polite. He was a quiet man, always reading the newspaper, always nodding. But Evelyn, she looked at my shoes, Target, on sale. She looked at my hands, calloused from working, and she decided right then and there I was a gold digger. She's pretty, Mark, she had said, loud enough for me to hear in the next room, but she's temporary. Don't get attached. They always want something. When we got engaged, she offered me $50,000 to leave him when I refused. She wore black to our wedding. She sat in the front row and cried, not tears of joy, but tears of mourning. But the real war started when I got pregnant. Mark was ecstatic. Richard was happy to finally have a grandchild. Evelyn was suspicious from the moment Leo was born. She analyzed him. Mark has distinct features: piercing blue eyes, blonde hair, a strong jawline, the Kensington look. I have dark brown hair, brown eyes, and olive skin. Leo came out looking exactly like me: brown eyes, dark curls. He had Mark's smile. But everything else was me to Evelyn. This was proof. He doesn't look like Mark, she would say, hovering over the crib. Are you sure the hospital didn't swap babies? Or maybe you were confused about the dates, Elena? For 5 years, she dripped poison into our lives. Are you sure he's yours, Mark? He's so dark. None of the Kensingtons have brown eyes. Mark tried to defend me. He fought with her. He yelled, but Mark is a gentle soul. He wanted peace. He wanted his mommy to love him every time he fought back. She would manipulate him, fake a heart attack, cry about being lonely, guilt him into apologizing, so we tolerated it. We limited contact, but the incident in the garden changed everything. She hadn't just insulted me, she had broken my son, and then she made the mistake of pushing too far 3 days after the garden party. Mark came home from work early. He looked sick. He sat down at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. What is it? I asked, pouring him a glass of water. My mother called, he said. She's cutting us off. We don't need their money. Mark, we have our own jobs. It's not just the money, Mark said. Looking up with tears in his eyes, she convinced Dad to write me out of the will, the estate, the family trust, everything. She told him. He choked on the words. She told him what? She told him that she has proof you cheated. She told him Leo isn't my son. She said she won't let a bastard child inherit the Kensington legacy. I felt the room spin. Proof? What proof? Nothing, just her paranoid theories, but Dad listens to her. He always has. She demanded. Mark took a deep breath. She demanded a DNA test. She said if we don't provide a DNA test proving Leo is my son, we are exiled from the family forever. I stared at him, the audacity, the cruelty. She wants a test. I asked softly. I told her no, Mark said quickly, grabbing my hand. Elena, I know Leo is mine. I don't need a test. I don't care what she says. I'm not going to insult you by asking for one. I looked at my husband. I loved him so much for that he trusted me, but I realized something. As long as that doubt existed in the air, Evelyn would win. She would always have that weapon. She would poison Richard against Leo forever. Call her back, I said. Mark looked confused. What? Call her back. Tell her we accept. Elena, no, you don't have to. I want to, I said. My voice was steady, but on one condition. What condition? We don't just do a standard paternity test at a clinic. We use a high-end genetic lab, the kind that maps ancestry, health traits, everything. If she's so obsessed with the Kensington bloodline, let's give her the full picture. Let's prove not just paternity, but lineage. I had a gut feeling, a strange, nagging intuition. Evelyn was too obsessed with purity. She was too loud about cheating. Psychologists call it projection. And I added, we reveal the results in front of everyone at the anniversary dinner next month. Mark hesitated. She's planning a huge gala for their 40th anniversary. You want to do it there? She humiliated Leo in front of her friends, I said, my eyes narrowing. I want the apology to be just as public. Mark nodded slowly. Okay, let's do it. The next week was a blur of swabs and paperwork. We hired a private, specialized lab. I swabbed Leo's cheek. Mark swabbed his, but I did something else, something sneaky. I needed Richard's DNA. I was going to prove lineage. I needed to connect Leo to his grandfather. 2 days later, we went to the Kensington house for a peace summit tea while Mark distracted Evelyn in the living room. I slipped into the kitchen. Richard had just finished an espresso. His cup was sitting in the sink. My heart was pounding in my throat. I felt like a spy in a movie. I took a sterile swab from my purse, quickly wiped the rim of the cup, and sealed it in a plastic tube. I sent all 3 samples to the lab. 1, Leo, the child. 2, Mark, the alleged father. 3, Richard, the alleged grandfather. I paid extra for expedited results. I paid extra for the detailed family tree analysis. Then we waited the weeks leading up to the anniversary. Dinner were tense. Evelyn was smug. She called Mark every day. I hope you're prepared for the truth. Mark, she'd say, I've already spoken to the lawyers. Once the test comes back negative, we can start the annulment process for your marriage. She was so sure. She was absolutely convinced that I was a cheater. She couldn't comprehend that someone with brown eyes could produce a child with brown eyes. The package arrived 3 days before the party. It was a thick, heavy envelope. I sat in my car in the driveway, my hands shaking. I tore open the seal. I flipped past the charts and the scientific jargon. I went straight to the summary page. Test 1. Paternity, Mark versus Leo. Probability of paternity. 9,999,998%. Conclusion. Mark Kensington is the biological father of Leo Kensington. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Of course I knew that. But seeing it on paper felt like armor then. I turned the page to the Grandparentage Analysis Test 2. Grandparentage, Richard versus Leo. Probability of relation, 0%. Conclusion, Richard. Kensington is not biologically related to Leo. Kensington. I froze. I read it again. Leo is Mark's son. Leo is not Richard's grandson. If A equals B, but C does not equal B, that means A does not equal C. Mark is not Richard's son. My mouth fell open. The world went silent. I quickly flipped to the ancestry breakdown. Richard Kensington is famous for his pure British-Scottish heritage. Mark's DNA breakdown. 50% Eastern European, 50% generic Western European. There was no British Mitch. Evelyn. The woman who preached about bloodlines, the woman who called my son a mistake. The woman who tried to destroy my marriage based on purity. She had lied for 38 years. Mark wasn't a Kensington and Richard didn't know. I looked at the paper. It wasn't just a DNA test anymore, it was a nuclear bomb. I sat there for an hour, thinking if I reveal this, I destroy Mark's world. He loves his dad, but if I don't reveal this, Evelyn destroys my son. She destroys my marriage. She wins. I looked at the rearview mirror. I saw Leo's car seat in the back. I remembered the way he cried when she pushed him away. I remembered her calling him a bastard. I put the papers back in the envelope. I sealed it. Game on. Evelyn. The Kensington 40th Anniversary Gala was lavish. It was held in the grand ballroom of a downtown hotel. There were huge ice sculptures, a 10-piece band, and about 200 guests, the elite of the city. Evelyn wore a gold gown. She looked triumphant. She spent the first hour ignoring me, parading Mark around like a trophy she was about to reclaim. Richard looked happy, but tired. He greeted me kindly. Elena. Glad you could come despite everything. I wouldn't miss it, Richard, I said. Clutching my purse, the envelope felt heavy inside. Dinner was served: lobster, filet mignon, expensive wine. When the dessert plates were cleared, the speeches began. Evelyn took the microphone. She stood on the small stage, glowing under the spotlight. Thank you all for coming, she said, her voice smooth as silk. 40 years with my wonderful Richard. We have built a legacy of excellence, of truth. She paused and looked directly at our table. She looked at me. Family is everything, she continued, but family must be protected. Sometimes weeds grow in the garden, and they must be pulled. A few people whispered. Everyone knew the rumors she had spread about me. Tonight, Evelyn said, smiling a cruel, shark-like smile, we have a bit of housekeeping. My daughter-in-law, Elena, agreed to a test to prove the legitimacy of her son. I have the results here. She held up an envelope. Wait, what? I panicked. She had her own envelope? Then I realized she must have run a test too. Maybe she swiped a glass from Leo. I haven't opened it yet, Evelyn announced dramatically. I wanted us to learn the truth together. She was so arrogant. She was so sure the test would prove Leo wasn't Mark's. She was willing to open it live on stage. Mark stood up. Mom, stop, don't do this. Sit down, Mark. She snapped. It's time to free you from this charade. She tore open her envelope. She pulled out the paper. She put on her reading glasses. The room was dead silent. Let's see, she said into the mic. Probability of paternity. She stopped. I watched her face. It went from smug satisfaction to confusion, then to shock, then to pale. Sickly white, she stared at the paper. Her hand started to shake. Well? Someone shouted from the back. Evelyn lowered the microphone. She tried to crumple the paper. It seems there is an error. This lab is incompetent. We will discuss this privately. No, I shouted. I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the floor. Read it, Evelyn. I walked toward the stage. Security. Evelyn shrieked. Get her out. She doesn't need to read hers, I said, pulling out my own thick envelope, because I have my own copy and mine is much more detailed. I walked up to the stage. Mark was behind me, trying to stop me. Elena, what are you doing? Protecting our son? I whispered to him. I grabbed the microphone before Evelyn could stop me. Evelyn claimed my son wasn't a Kensington because he didn't have the look. I told the crowd. My voice didn't shake. I felt powerful. She demanded a DNA test. Well, Here it is. I held up the first page. Mark is Leo's father 999%. My son is legitimate. I was faithful. A murmur went through the crowd. Richard stood up. Looking relieved, thank God, he breathed. But, I continued. Turning to face Evelyn, she looked like a trapped animal. Her eyes were pleading, don't please, don't. He remembered Leo's drawing in the dirt. I remembered, don't call me Grandma since. Evelyn was so concerned about the Kensington bloodline, I said into the mic. I decided to run a full lineage test to see where Leo gets his genes. Elena, stop. Evelyn lunged for me. Mark stepped in between us. He held his mother back. Let her finish. Mom, the test shows that Leo is Mark's son, I said clearly, but strangely the test also proves that Leo is not related to his grandfather. Richard, the silence in the room was heavy. It was suffocating. Richard walked slowly to the stage. He looked confused. What are you saying, Elena? I looked at this kind, quiet man. This broke my heart. But he deserved to know, I'm saying, I said softly. Handing him the papers, that Leo isn't your grandson. Richard, because Mark isn't your son. Richard took the papers. He read the lines I had highlighted, the 0% match. He looked up at Evelyn was trembling. She wasn't the queen anymore. She was a fraud. Richard, she stammered. It's a lie. The science is wrong. Who? Richard asked. His voice was barely a whisper, but the microphone picked it up. Who was it, Evelyn? Evelyn looked around the room, searching for an escape. It was 38 years ago. It meant nothing. You were always working, and then the tennis instructor. He was just... The room gasped. She had just admitted it. The tennis instructor. Mark stood there, frozen. His entire identity was crumbling. He wasn't a Kensington, the pure bloodline Evelyn worshipped. She had polluted it herself. She projected her own guilt onto me. For 5 years, she accused me of the exact crime she had committed. Richard dropped the papers. He looked at Evelyn with a look of total strangerhood. Get out, he said. Richard, please. The guests, get out. Richard roared. It was a sound I had never heard from him. It shook the chandeliers. Evelyn gathered her skirts and ran. She ran out of the ballroom. Out of the hotel? And out of their lives. The party ended immediately. The guests left in shocked whispers. We sat in the empty ballroom. Me, Mark, and Richard. Mark was sitting on the edge of the stage, crying, I'm not your son. Dad, I'm nobody. Richard walked over to him. He sat down next to Mark and put his arm around him. Mark, Richard said, his voice cracking, I changed your diapers. I taught you how to ride a bike. I sat up with you when you had the flu. Biology is science, but fatherhood? That's love. He pulled Mark into a hug. You are my son. You always will be. Nothing on a piece of paper changes that, I cried. Then finally, I cried. Richard looked at me. I am sorry. Elena, I let her treat you like dirt because I was too weak to stand up to her. I thought she was just proud. I didn't know she was hiding a monster. It's okay. Richard, I said, and Leo, Richard said, smiling through his tears. He is my grandson. I don't care about the genes. He's my boy's boy. Bring him over tomorrow. I want to put his drawing on the fridge. It's been 6 months since that night. The divorce was messy. Evelyn tried to fight for half the assets, but the prenuptial agreement she had signed 40 years ago had a strict fidelity clause. Because she admitted to the affair in front of 200 witnesses, she walked away with almost nothing. She lives in a small condo in Florida. Now she sends letters to Mark, but he returns them unopened. Mark and Richard are closer than ever. They actually took a DNA test together later. Privately, it confirmed Mark isn't biological, but Richard legally adopted Mark as an adult. Just to make a point, to make it official. And Leo loves going to Grandpa's house. Last week, we were in the garden, the same garden where she rejected him. Richard was pushing Leo on a swing. Higher, Grandpa, higher. Leo screamed, laughing. I watched them, sipping lemonade. The grass was green, the air was sweet, and the toxicity was gone. Evelyn wanted to protect the Kensington name in the end. She did. She left. I looked down at my phone. A notification popped up, a message from a blocked number. It was Evelyn. Title: Miss my grandson body? I am willing to forgive you if you let me see him. I smiled. I didn't feel angry anymore. I just felt pity. I typed a reply. Leo doesn't have a grandma named Evelyn. He only has a grandpa named Richard. Then I blocked the number again. Boundaries aren't walls, my friends. They are gates, and sometimes You have to lock the gate to keep the monsters out if you enjoyed this story of sweet revenge. Please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments. Would you have exposed Evelyn publicly like I did? Or would you have kept the secret for Richard's sake? Let me know. See you in the next story.